Alright, there we go. That's the button that actually moves. Cool. Hi, hello. This is Mark Belgros. Coming to you live once again here on the World Link streaming channel. Yet again, here to talk about the Wildsea. We're kind of doing we'll do a second part of the session. We'll talk a little bit more towards the end about our plans for the rest of the month. But we will basically but for right now, my mic is very quiet. Why is my mic very quiet? Well, let's see if we can't figure that out. System volume is all the way up. Oh, that's why. You're using the wrong one. Now I should be much clearer. Now that I've switched from the headset mic, which is currently in, to the mic, which is actually on and in front of me. Good thing I left that mic live, otherwise no one would have known that I wasn't talking. Just would have been staring at a screen for a while going, why is this man talking? Why isn't Mark talking? Alright, here I am. Basically, here I am, and here is Lorelink. So, basically, if you were here last week, to kind of recap what we talked about last week, we were here talking about the Wildsea, which is an indie RPG. Which is it is a post-apocalyptic kind of it's kind of, there's a trend for basically post kind of reverse of an apocalypse, where you go from the entire world has been destroyed and there's nothing out there to the entire world has been basically overflowing with life and verdancy and green. The world has rewilded. Yeah, that's a basically a good basically post-humanity, but not necessarily post the natural world. So you still have some of the same, basically some of the key hallmarks like lost technology, basically scattered groups of civilizations which have been separated, communication just restarting, small individuals who are connecting these settlements and camps, acting basically, so you can have both parts of this. You can have advanced technology mixed in with basically brute force methods, basically of ways of doing things, since basically some things have been lost and others have not. In particular, the world in basically the Wildsea has been struck by something called the verdant. Basically, I'm going to double check the. It has been taken over by a calamitous group, basically growth, the verdancy, which is essentially just massive amounts of trees and plants, basically grow up almost literally overnight, taking over the world, forcing everyone to either go up to basically be safe at the highest levels, basically the highest altitudes, or change to deal with the fact that they're now cut off from the sun and now surrounded in this kind of wild, mystic, semi-fae kind of wilderness that surrounds them. So the music after. Yes, I have timed my music to give me dramatic emphases for seemingly dull things. Everybody needs a soundtrack to life. But what we are talking about here today. So in any case, if you're interested in basically that, a little bit more discussions over what the Wildsea has, game-wise and things like that. This is basically, this is the second part of it. It won't necessarily that you have to watch it, but if you want to learn more about the Wildsea and a little bit what I think about it, how it works, check out the first part of this video, as it were, on our YouTube channel, where all of our streams are archived. So, what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to go a little bit more in depth into the Wildsea. Let's fix that so it's a little bit more readable. You wanna? I can make that. I can make that huge. There we go. Let's shrink that down. Move that around. Make that a little bit less crazy. I don't need all of Adobe's windows involved. I could do that, and let's see what I want. Cool. So it is basically a scenario called the One-Armed Scissor. This is essentially basically the actual main book doesn't come with a quick start adventure like a lot of campaigns and things like that do, where they have like a suggested adventure in the back, and we'll get into a little bit why they do that here in a bit. But basically, the One-Armed Scissor is essentially the first scenario that basically he designed. It is available in one form for free on the itch.io, basically on the Felix's itch.io website, where you can pick up basically the quick start rules for this game, as well as this kind of sample scenario, encounter, adventure, as it were, can be found there. It is available in two forms. One is a free form, which is essentially the first version of the scenario that Felix created, and then there was he came back later and redesigned it, added a little bit more art, added a little bit more detail to it in order to best basically kind of flesh it out. And it's available on itch.io for about $5. Of course, it's itch.io, so it's always one of those, basically you can pay more if you want to support the developers. Same with the base version of it. You can pay like a $1, pay like the $1 suggested donation, or just download it for free, depending on your circumstances. So, how the Wildsea, the way the Wildsea kind of works, is it's a little bit it is not like every other like D&D campaign where you have an overarching story that you're trying to tell necessarily as the GM or Firefly in this case, that covers an epic sweeping adventure where your characters are going to basically journey to the heart of this land, find this evil overlord who's ruling over this kingdom with a iron fist, and then through some scrappy luck and some encounters, you're going to depose the evil tyrant, or basically stop his evil scheme to take over the world, and be hailed as heroes, and basically ride off into your next adventure or into the sunset, depending how it works. The Wildsea is meant to be a little bit more grounded. That's in a sense in the fact that it's meant to be shorter adventures which focus more on exploration and more on exploration and more on. I'm trying to think. This game's playing for camera. Basically, discovery would probably be another way to put it. It lends itself slightly more to a monster, basically kind of the monster of the week kind of TV episode. This feels more like a season of a TV show than an epic movie or a Netflix streaming documentary or something like that. Scooby-Doo mystery, monster of the week type thing, because it is meant to be like they have experience, they have growth, they have projects and things like that where your characters can grow and basically work on things, but it is more meant to be your characters are journeying around in this world, and they will go around. They get a reason to sail from point A to point B. They have encounters along the way of wild and weird and mysterious stuff, and then they make it to point B, and they deliver whatever it is that basically point A wanted to send. They collect letters, they basically maybe communications, maybe they find out that there's something going on in point B, maybe it's a festival, maybe it's a basically a weird ritual is going on, or maybe maybe they're having problems with bandits or something like that in that local area, and then you kind of take place, you kind of have a little bit of adventure in that local area, and then you move from there on to your next point. And that's part of the reason probably why they didn't include a scenario as much in the main book, much like Blades of the Dark. I don't think Blades of the Dark has a starter adventure, and you really won't find too much starter adventures and things like that, because it is meant to be more of a exploration. It's meant to be more of a conversation between you and your players in terms of what your players basically want to find, want to explore, want to look into, and less of a you're dictating to your players, because your players already, basically when you're dealing with D&D and things like that, your players know what's going to happen. Your players know that there's a castle, there's a dungeon and a dragon when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons. They're going to go into the dungeon, explore through. At the bottom of the dungeon, there's a dragon. He's hoarding treasure. You conquer the dragon. You take his treasure. You leave. Basically, relatively straightforward. Basically, seeing a dragon in a dungeon doesn't startle your players, whereas if you show your players... let's see here. Something like this, your players really aren't going to necessarily know what to do with that. You're going to describe it. They're going to be like, okay. Basically, they're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. They're going to have to figure out how to what sort of players in the Dungeons and count out of their earnings in the last quarter. That's terrifying. That's terrifying, Tony. Basically, you don't want to bring too much of real life into this dungeon. But something like the encounter isn't necessarily just like, oh, okay, we know what to do. We need to. It is an ice dragon. Get your fire spells ready. Maybe we have to make a roll so that our characters know it is an ice creature and therefore we should use fire spells. But basically, it's a whole lot of figuring out what this is. Is it actively hostile? What can we get out of it? Because a lot of this game is based around a lot of your character growth and development and healing and things like that is based off of harvesting resources off of things. So it's like, oh, it's got eye stock. Can I cut off some of the eye stalks during the fight and use them in a project that I have? Or is this bile that it's spewing out useful and basically in an alchemical sense? Is it ink that we can print, basically that we can use it to basically print books and materials or write maps with it that have special properties? Or is it some kind of dissolving compound that we could use and create a weapon or a grenade that will help us in our next fight? Or maybe it's got weird healing properties that when mixed property with other stuff and then stuffed into a wound, the wound heals faster or seals over, or you can basically almost use it as a glue and reattach limbs or other mystical things. Excuse me. So all of those things can basically, you don't necessarily need to kill it. Maybe you just need to, maybe it's the type of thing you can just drive off. And get your resources that you gain from it and move on, continue, because again, you're exploring, you're going from point A to point B. This was just something you ran into along the way. A cargo ship or a discovery ship sailing from Europe to the New World wouldn't oh no, we've encountered a whale. Wow, that's weird. We don't know what that is. It's beating up our boat a little bit. okay, sail back and find it. We're gonna find it again. Well, no, you could just keep sailing. Basically, make note of it. Basically, draw it up and things like that. Discuss it with others. But basically, you don't necessarily have to defeat everything you come across. Everything can be its own little individual thing, a set piece. So, what does that mean for lore link, and what does that mean for planning, and in particular, what does that mean for things like the one-armed scissor? So, the one-armed scissor starts with a relatively basic, basically a relatively interesting hook. Basically, a missing library, basically ship leads to a treasure trove of both danger and actual treasure. This is why I'm not allowed to go. It's too scary. You're just only allowed to. You're only allowed to come up with horror story ideas. It's a great idea for a dread game, where your players are basically going through and just trying to all the players have come together into one dungeon and they're trying to make it out with as much treasure as they can, while an accountant stalks them and asks them how much they're declaring. And if it ever catches them, basically what they've declared doesn't match with what they're carrying, they lose a chunk of their treasure, and they're just trying to get out with enough. They're just trying to get out with enough money. I could see something around it. You could make something around it, but it would definitely be a horror thing. But you could hear the click clack of keyboard keys and calculator presses and printer print. Basically, in the darkness, you have wandered into the accountant's lair. You have come too close. So, in any case, with the Wildsea, you basically what you're going basically. So you've got the hook and things like that, and so how adventures and scenarios and things like that kind of work in, or how Felix wants you to think about this is, don't think of this as here is the adventure, part 1, part 2, part 3. It's more, here is a spot that basically adventurers can take, slow sliding and clicking of the abacus. Click. Here is a spot where basically adventures can happen, and what adventure your players find should be up to your players. Here are some ideas of adventures they could find, but it isn't a part A, then part B, then part C. So how they want you to plan it out is they're going to be like, okay, here's your the important thing about Wildsea adventures is they generally, assuming that you're planning a whole adventure rather than coming into an existing campaign. You're generally going to start from a location. And that location is probably going to be a town. There could be other, you could start in medias res where they're sailing from point A to point B and something happens. But a lot of them are going to be, you start in a place or you've just arrived at a place. And something has happened to your player. You kind of turn your players loose on the town, and you populate that town with interesting ideas, which may relate to which may all feed into your one plot, but basically how they affect your plot is going to be up to you and up to your players. For example, so Three Masks is the town that they have set out in as your kind of starting location in this adventure. And so you have basically Pulaski's, which is essentially your main town, your main town square, basically the place where the town comes together to do all of their things. It's a pub. They describe it as a pub, a tavern, a post office, a library combination. There's a docks. So basically what I'm setting up if I'm going to be setting up a Wildsea adventure, basically starting with this town is a good place to start setting things up in terms of, okay, what are basically, what do I want to make available to my players? So where do I basically, what do I play? Basically, I mean, I know my players and how they work, and basically, usually, basically, we've had a session 0, we've talked it over, and one of the things they do, basically, one of the interesting things they like doing in, basically, with Wildsea is they have a suggestion for something called unsetting questions. And unsetting questions aren't basically necessarily basically you talking with the players and establishing what your world is like enough to, like a Dresden Fate game has you set up a city with your players bringing different parts and pieces of the city together. Basically, this is a bar in the city. This is a here's a famous movie house in the city, and then here are all the weird stuff that happens around them. They're kind of they're just questions to get your players in the mindset of the world. Like, what are the local insects is a particular delicacy? What's the insect and how is it prepared? This isn't necessarily something which is going to be the entire focus of the adventure. But it gets your players thinking about, okay, insects, basically, in this town, insects are a delicacy. Basically, how it's prepared can give you answers over how the town works and things like that. Basically this town uses X or Y and things like that. The spit of the three masks, spit being basically not like saliva spit, but meaning the spit of a mountain, because in this again, due to the verdancy, the only places which are still viable land are places that were really high up, like mountain peaks or mesas or things like that, or places that were dragged up by the verdancy and kind of made into permanent places, like a building which is basically got grabbed by basically one of their giant trees and is now just part of the build, basically now part of the tree, and people have made it into their home. So in this case, the spit of the three masks of the town, basically the area of the three masks, is famous for a literary festival. How do they celebrate? So now you're getting into details of your players are giving you information about the town, things that can happen in the town, basically characteristics and things like that. If they're like, oh, basically everyone in the town takes the entire day and goes outside and basically hands books to their friends or gives away books. Okay, it's a generous society. It's a giving society. It's a friendly society where people are interacting. Basically, there are competitions or things like that. Basically, where people they have poetry reading competitions. Okay, they're more of an artistic or literary festival. They have book carrying competitions, okay, so they're a little bit more of a competitive. They're a competitive society where they have events that they care about. Okay, these are ideas that the players are feeding you to give you an idea of what they're thinking about when they're thinking about this game, so that when you go back to your planning, because this is a session 0, you come back to your planning, you're like, okay, my players talked about the bar. They talked about the competition fields. I'm going to create the competition fields as a place. They talked about the head librarian as the leader of the festival. Okay, I'm going to make sure that I create a character, of that lead thing, and I'm going to add it to the information that is already been given to me by the scenario. And the scenario has a couple of places and some people as kind of like, okay, here are some other things that can help populate your town and point them in the direction of some of the other hooks that we've scattered about town. So in their case, they've given you basically the three masks. They've given you Pulaski's as this pub, post office, and it's got a lot of it's got a pair of axes, it's got bookshelves lining the walls, and patrons in the bar are drinking and reading. So you've got a couple of different hooks there in terms of, hey, there's literacy is important in this town, books are everywhere. Why are books, which everywhere else in the world may be less common? Because again, you're in a post-apocalyptic type world. Basically, there isn't exactly a publishing industry, a print on demand. There isn't just printing presses just dumping books out, but this town has a bunch of them. So that might give you something to be like, okay, give your players basically a hook to be like, hey, why are there a lot of books around here? What is this town's connection to books? They have basically they have the Overlook House, or the Shattered Society, or Shattered Socket, not the Shattered Society. The Shattered Society is interesting. The Shattered Socket, which is their smokehouse. Again, this is a world which fire is incredibly dangerous, so anyone who wishes to smoke has to do it inside of a very specialized designed building meant to not burn. Because obviously open flame and fire would be a very bad thing when not only could your town burn, but the very ground and the waves around you. Basically, it's like if sailors sailed on an ocean that was continually covered in made of oil or gasoline, then open flame would be very, very, very restricted, because once that fire starts, it doesn't stop easily. So you've got a smokehouse, which has basically people talking, and basically maybe you've got things, basically people, you can overhear conversations and things like that about basically a missing library ship or something like that, if you want to guide your players basically a little bit basically in the direction of a missing library ship. And basically give them that as a hook for basically ways for the players to go. And basically last of all, the last thing they had was basically you kind of have a town square, which again basically has a little bit more basically like library themed basically stuff, printing equipment, cartographers and things like that, and maps of the surrounding area, which means that now you've got someone who can tell you a little bit about the lore of the look. Basically, it's got the town cartographer hanging out there. So now you have basically have someone who can give you a little bit more about the reason, about the region, missing areas, and the basically missing or mysterious things in the area. Like if you wanted to bring up the library ship, you could. If you wanted to bring up the basically a mysterious manor that was known to be full of books, which is rumored to be in the area. So cartography would be a good way to talk about that. And basically, then you might you want to throw people in as well. So you have people who basically are either who could be talking about talking about mysterious going on. Basically, people who tell you about ships going missing. The cartographer who is basically there to tell you about missing places in local lore and basically maps and things like that, which are always important in a world which is constantly shifting slightly and is brand new and rediscoverable. And like last of all, basically if you need on a more direct hook, you've got Chavez, who can basically is someone who's missing a sister from the ship, or basically maybe they survived, basically the last survivor of the ship. So what you're a lot of what they do with these is basically they're like, how do the players want to interact? What plot threads are they looking to pull on? And then theme the adventure around that. So if your players go in and are like, oh no, this library ship is missing, basically basically it's probably been attacked. We're going to find out who got it. Basically things like that. So now you're going to start theming your adventure and basically kind of pulling them in on the theme of on the ship, what happened to the ship, and basically maybe it's basically now you're going to start throwing things in. Maybe there are smugglers who are attacking basically attacking local ships. Okay, so now you've created kind of the villain, and you have basically you're creating those things. And so how all of this gets tracked by the GM is where basically their system of tracks comes into play. And so it basically, for example, if your players go out there, you're like, oh, hey, we're going to, basically, there's a lot of different rumors that get tracked down. Like, we need to find this character's sister. Then maybe that's basically, which is on, basically, maybe that involves the ship, or maybe basically it's a deeper plot than that. If you really want them focused, they seem really interested in finding this one NPC's sister. Or maybe they just want to find the ship. And so you're going to have what they call as tracks. And tracks are similar to clocks in Blades of the Dark. And basically, you're going to, when your players start going down a path that they have established as they focused in on something. Like you're paying attention to them, you're talking with them, you're providing them information, and they seem to have zoomed in on something. You're like, okay, my players want to find the one-armed scissor. I fed them. The one NPC says their sister was on the ship. They've heard rumors that the ship, the dockmaster was talking to a different character about how the ship was missing. And maybe the cartographer someone else was talking with the cartographer trying to get information about the local area, and found out some information about maybe you're bringing the Hanging Manor into it at that point, or maybe you're not. Maybe they didn't go down that route. And so, but in any case, you've got a goal now. You have a project that the group is working on. And projects are a lot of how this game system kind of works, and how it expects the GM to interact with the player is through these tracks, which essentially are projects that individuals or basically the group as a whole are working on. They look a lot like, basically they give you some sample tracks in here, where there are a series of connected dots. Basically, Blades of the Dark has a clock, which is essentially a pie that you basically get sliced into equal slices. And so you have you're like, okay, my players are zooming in on this. You're going to write down in an area where they can see it. The project finding the one-armed scissor, and that track is going to give them basically indications on how they are doing on progressing that story. So it gives you a solid indication to your players what's going on, what purpose they're making, how much progress they've made. It also gives you a solid reward to their actions. That can feel more tangible to your players rather than they have a conversation with an NPC, the NPC tells them something, and they may or may not realize, they rolled really well, and they got some more information, and they may or may not realize how much progress they've made. The track basically allows you to say, okay, you have made... Basically, we feel because of the information you got, we're advancing the finding the one-armed scissor track, basically 1 dot. Excuse me. And so with Lore Link, I'm going to keep track of that. Basically, the events are a perfect place to keep track of those projects. Now, and again, basically, those projects aren't going to just be... You're not going to just have one overarching one for the entire thing. your players may have like minor ones in between. Maybe there's one basically. Maybe they decide that they're wanting to strike up this basically a relationship with this merchant in town. Maybe the bookseller or book printer, and one of your characters is like, hey, I can totally see a market for basically publishing some books, maybe either of their adventures that they've decided, or they have some cool basically maps or other things that they want to publish. They want to work with this printer here in town to produce these things and then sell them later. So you're going to create a track for their own personal projects. And those are kind of handled with basically what are known as montages, where you kind of montages are your players go to town, and rather than be like, all right, everyone has to stick as a group and goes through the entire town as a one single unit and interacts at point A and point B. In montages are, okay, I'm going to open the floor up to my players and let them tell me what they're going to do. Everybody's going to get a scene or so, and they can take the focus, which is basically taking the mic, basically talk about what their character is doing, make an action, make a roll, make some progress, make some meaningful, make a meaningful scene out of it, and either advance an existing project that they have, like maybe they've had a project like, I want to work on curing this disease, or figuring out how to track this monster, or again looking to publish something, or basically have healing or recovering from injuries, or repairing a ship, or things like that. All of those are projects that can be handled during that player's montage. And so you're passing the focus around, and players can pass focus from one to another. Basically, they're like, I'm going to go do this, and basically then partway through, I'm going to stop and talk to the other player and be like, hey, basically, how is your X going? Or can I help you with this? Or here is this which you can use on with your project, and they're going to pick up the ball literally or metaphorically, and then advance their next montage as well, and move through that. And so there's a lot of this event section is going to become kind of your place where you're going to keep track of all of those. Basically, it's going to be a combination essentially of events and sessions are going to be your two kind of major things for this, because basically sessions are going to give you a handle on, and so when I'm putting together this adventure here, I'm going to want to go, so it's good. We talked about this. We talked about fighting the one-armed scissor as being that. Let's get to 5 block idea and a 6-week fill in by exploring that area. And so I'm going to use notes in here. I'll use notes to track those. And then I'm going to put that on my session as a event on the session, so I can keep track of what my players are working on and what they're doing on that. And so when I'm preparing for this, I'm going to want to, because I don't know what actions my players are necessarily what's going to particularly spring their thing. I have a couple of ideas though. So I've got I've got them looking for the ship, because that's basically as a possible thing. I could instead, basically depending on how my players are, library matter. So, I'm got this zoomed in just slightly too much. I've got it zoomed in for the stream, and so I've lost the save button for that particular screen on that one. Okay, so basically heading to the manor. And so basically, I've got these two different kind of plot threads here that maybe the players are going to search for the manor instead and be given a location for it. And so they're searching for the manor, and so I'm going to have that track for that option. Or maybe I'm going to have an option for basically have the ship. That way I have both of those available, and then I can keep track of, basically I'm going to put those all into my session. both of those in. So heading to basically finding one-armed scissors, heading to the manor. And if my players have any, basically have their own individual, basically things they're working on, I'm going to store those in here as well. And those are ones that I'm going to use the, so like if I have a player who's, basically repairing their ship, the skeleton key. Yeah, let's go ahead and again, basically for right now, basically we're working on adding another custom field type that will help do progress bars and tracks and clocks, things like that. But for right now, we'll just make it a number. Track. Let's go do that. And so now I have that track. If I want to be more specific, I could make it, basically I could have named it track out of 4, repairing the ship. Out of 4. And so now I know my players are working on that, and I can add that to the session as something I know they're working on. And so basically I've got that's what I'm going to set up basically. So I'm going to have the characters set up, basically, which are all of those. I'm going to have the locations set up so that I have basically junk dealer and basically insurgent are basically under the town. So that. There we go. So I've got the one-armed scissor. Basically, so if the players are exploring the ship, I've got some ideas of what the layouts of the ship is, and I'm going to throw in some of the more interesting things that are in the ship in there. So, like the captain's cabin. Basically, a lavish. Bed thing. Shirts and ships. So basically, now what do I want that to be interesting here? Like it could be a stack of chart. Obviously, we talked about that. Basically, charts are really interesting in a world which is basically mostly unmapped. So getting maps can help. Basically, your players could be guides to additional sections, or they could be treasure because just basically a stack of charts could sell. Basically, could sell well on a market. Let's get some portraits of people. Basically, we need some. Basically, there's some whispers in the room. Or we do this for the words. Basically, again, another plot hook. You could have basically they have a captain's annotated log. And directions to Fazio. Yeah, this is the Final Fantasy station on Pretzel. Oops. Again, basically, I'm putting some. These are things that they suggest, and obviously these are. Basically, they've got those items in there, so you can put resources. And then you can have interest. Basically, kind of information. Captain's table, the dashboard, and a wheel. So basically they suggest that this is basically so you kind of set up these rooms with kind of interesting points and things like that. Basically, some resources that you basically give your players some benefits, as well as point them towards future plots and things like that. Like, who are these people? Why do they have basically? Who are these portraits we have in here? Who's Marcus? Who's Howman? And basically they have like an entire section where they're like, okay, it basically, how do you want to keep the story going? And they have a couple of suggestions for basically how the story could progress. So basically, let me show you that. So they have a little sidebar over here, which is snapshots and story threads. I really feel like it. There we go. Basically, the Scissors crew disappears to the manor. If you're like, okay, let's make this more of a story about the manor and what's going on in there. And basically they're like, then basically, here's some ideas for suggestions for basically the charts to which are found that we just talked about in the captain's table. Maybe those charts lead to the lead to the manor. If the regrown weight of the biscuit, they notice the fact that it's missing their lifeboats, the missing outriders. You can point that out. They also talk about something called twists, and twists are essentially they are doubles on any roll. Basically, you're rolling d6s. It's a pool-based system where you're getting a number of d6s and then rolling them, and you're looking for the highest number that you roll. However, you only take the highest number is the only number which matters for the result. So 6 is an unqualified success, 4 and 5 is a qualified success, 3 is a qualified. I think 2 and 3 are a qualified failure, and 1 is an absolute failure. And so, but if you roll, given the number of dice you roll, if you roll doubles, then it can basically not only does you get the result of what the die is, you get the kind of the table as a whole makes a decision on a narrative twist to the action, which benefits or harms, but adds something to the scene, that makes the scene more interesting. So basically to add but it's something as the table decides. But as the Firefly, as the GM, you have the overall story in your head, or maybe you can make suggestions that could encourage the story to go in one way or another. So if you're like they're exploring the boat and they get a narrative twist in the captain's cabin, maybe you're like, okay, but your character could discover, if you would like, your character takes damage, fails to open that, but breaks open the secret compartment underneath, and inside will be some interesting information. And if they agree to take that, you're like, okay, here is your interesting information. It's a partially completed map of the of this new mysterious location if you're wanting to push them towards the manor. If you're deciding, if the narrative, you're like, okay, because they're in here, well, I'm going to push them more towards the manor. If it's on the deck, maybe you're like, oh, okay, maybe they'll find something like basically like a half-eaten corpse. If you're like, okay, let's make them fighting something natural that was eating them. Okay, I'm going to push the story that way because they got the twist here. And so basically, twists are a way that you can push the story in a given direction. You can encourage and it's basically a lot of the Wildsea wants your adventures to be more freeform. They don't want you to necessarily sit down and plan out the entire A to Z adventure from the start. They kind of want you to come up with an area, then listen to your players, because with those twists, your players are making suggestions at the table too, and the designer of the game doesn't want you to shut down your player and be like, your players are like, oh, maybe I find one of the crew members stuffed into a barrel, basically dead and stuffed into the barrel. Like, oh wow, that's kind of cool. But yeah, let's get the table is really interested in basically like how maybe we can discover basically one of the crew members and how they died and things like that. And you're like, oh no, they're not. Basically, you're like, no, you are very stuck on none of the crew members died. They all ran off into this mansion. They're all living there, or they've set this up as a trap or whatever, and you shut down that suggestion at the table because you already have the adventure planned. They want you to be like, oh, okay, cool. So that's the direction we're going. It's basically them finding the corpse might start a new project. Maybe you're going to basically, as soon as that happens, you're going to come in here into Lorelink and you're going to be like, okay, cool. You're going to be like, okay, now we have a new project of the crew. Basically, so now we've got a new plot for, basically we have a new track set up for discovering the fate of the crew. And so now they're going to be looking through the ship. They're going to be pulling stuff up. You're going to be giving rewards for successful rolls or things like that, which are going to advance that fate of the Scissors crew. And you basically, as a Firefly, the designer of the game isn't like, give up all your ideas, only deal with what your players do, and improv the entire game. It's be open to your players' suggestions and let them guide how the story goes into your rough story beats. Like, so what they've got in this adventure is, okay, I've got those locations, I've got the hanging manor, I've got the one-armed scissors, basically, and how basically I've got these ideas, but how we approach them is going to be based on the players. I have this manor which is full of basically interesting rooms and spaces and books and things like that. And if they go through and you're like, okay, they go to the manor looking for the ship, you're going to populate the manor and use twists in the manor to give them more information about the ship or the fate of the crew. Or if they go to the ship, maybe the point of the twist is to push them towards the manor. Or if your players, you know your players better, maybe you're like, hey, we've been doing a lot of exploration, and basically we've been doing a lot of talking to people and NPCs, and I know a couple of the players have been itching to try out these new gadgets they've carrying around, these new gear that they've carried around for fights and things like that. And I feel like we need to change the pace up of the game, so let's put some Jacobone Marauders. Let's put some villains in here that the players are going to have to encounter and fight and defeat. Or maybe I'm going to throw some natural threats in, like the pinwolves or that weird ray creature I showed you earlier. And I have these ideas basically set up, and I know my players ahead of time, like, okay, they're more like, our group is more combat, like the group that we have for the Lorelink adventures. They're a little bit more old school. Basically, they've been playing. They've played games for a while, but their basis is in basically D&D and Pathfinder and things like that. And I know basically they enjoy conflict. They enjoy discovery and things like that. But I might basically be like, okay, I feel like sometimes basically like basically some of our players. Like Martine just wants to punch something in the face, you know? And basically, I know that's the way my group works, and basically, and they're not necessarily always going to be looking for a fight, but they like the catharsis of finding the villain and punching the villain in the face at the end of the story. So what's focused? I'm going to have that idea that the end result of this adventure is going to be a fight, and I'm going to prepare for that. I'm going to this. I'm going to put some pinwolves in. Let's go ahead and add this. Let's upload a new image. And let's campaigns, the Wildsea, scissor images, pinwolf. Let's add this guy in here. So bug-like creature. Yes, bone mandibles. Okay. Let's save that. Or looks like the bottom of your screen is not necessarily the bottom of your screen. I'd like to fix that. First, I do that. OBS, that's wrong. Right. Ugh. Let's just do that. Okay. Zooming. Alright. Oops, I put the pinwolves in the wrong place, but we'll deal with that later. So now I've got the pinwolves. And basically the pinwolves are... Let's pull some information in on the pinwolves. Hazards. And basically they actually have a section where they're talking about hazards is even with your hazards, basically you can basically how one party basically takes care of a hazard is going to differ necessarily from how another party may deal with the same hazard. If you feel that your group is more of the come up with like clever puzzle fights to take care of them. Okay, basically maybe you arrange things so that they need to figure out what scares the pinwolves off, or what hurts them or frightens them, and things like that, and then work around that, and then you base the fight, the encounter around discovering that information and driving them off. Or maybe you do maybe you give them individual health bars and things like that. That way each player can have a moment to do damage and shine and things like that. So let's grab some information. Let's do this. I love their description of what their little short description for the pinwolves, which is swift staccato predators. That was the first line there. I love when you're just sitting there and your phone comes on and you just look over at it like, what? Why are you trying to get my attention? No reason. Just lonely decided to turn on. Okay. Vicious pack hunter with stiletto limbs, pinwolves are a seemingly omnipresent threat across the various reaches and territories of the Wildsea. The coloring matches their surroundings, most often a combination of charcoal and earthy brands blended with the wood of the iron roots, though paler and stranger specimens have been reported. Their habits are cunning, combined with their natural speed and vicious natures, makes them a serious threat to the experience. Despite this, they can be trained, usually at great personal cost. Use pinwolves if you want the crew to face something swift and uncanny. This game, I do like the fact that they kind of add these notes into their monster manual, so that basically they give you like, hey, I'm looking for a certain type of fight, and they give you that information, and then they give you basically a whole bunch of additional information. So there's going to be like that. And we'll do that. And actually, let's go ahead and save this and get out of the quick creations. We're doing a decent dump of information here. We'll give you basically some great little individuals, basically things over. Basically, because not all of your characters use, basically because of the way the world works, not all your characters necessarily use the same senses to observe the world. And so, basically, if you have a character who's more sound-based, you're going to want to give them, basically, you want to be able to give them information, and they give you a lot of interesting information about each of the senses. Though sometimes like, they're like, for taste, a lot of times taste is just, no one has. A lot of your more eldritch type horrors, they're just like, yeah, nobody eats this, and basically, even if you could, we suspect it would be really bad for you. And so basically, then they give you some way of describing their approach. Because again, one of the neat things about running a game like this, when you pull your players out of their standard kind of fantasy environment, is that you get a lot of, basically you can get a lot of, what is that? Or what's causing that? Or how do I basically, so being able to be like, basically they give you some great little details that you can hang your first encounters on. So your players are exploring the ship necessarily, then they just suddenly hear tack, 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 coming from the deck overhead. And basically in D&D, you're like, okay, there are goblins in the next room. You can hear them. Or there's a particular type of smell. Oh, it's probably a troll, or it's a hissing, scraping sound of scales. Oh, it's probably a dragon, and it takes a little bit of the menace out of it, as opposed to now you're like, okay, what's that? Basically, what sounds like stilts? Sounds like something kind of scraping and skittering. That's weird. Okay, what is that? And then basically, so then you build up this encounter, and then once they deal with it, and basically things like that, the next time it happens, basically they hear that tack noise, they know what's coming, and it's a little bit more, basically they know what's coming because they themselves have encountered it, as opposed to just everyone has heard stories of dragons, therefore encountering it. Basically, you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, and therefore, basically, there's basically the scrape of scales on stone. Cool, there's a dragon up ahead. There's a horrible smell. Oh, it's these, it's Ugloss, etc., etc. It takes a little bit away from it, because it gives them something different to hang those memories on. So it's a neat way, basically it's a neat way of approaching combat design and monster design that allows the Fireflies and GMs to build these things up long before, basically build these things up not only before the players see them, during the encounter, and then again in a future encounter as well. And then basically again you have all these resources and things like that, which can be, okay, what can the players get off of it? Like whispers are cool because whispers are their, I mean, again, basically they don't like using the word magic because they like to the creator is like, this world is a little bit more defined than that. It's not this weird, mysterious, unknown system that no one can understand and no one ever will. It's just something people are struggling to understand, and basically as part of the new world. And so that's why they basically, but it's like basically they're just a pair of words. It's just unsettling movement, and they're something that burrows into, like they say, basically kind of nestles into your players, can gain it from a fight, and it nestles into your brain, and then later at some point, maybe you give it as a successful part of a successful hit, maybe you give it as part of an unsuccessful hit. Or basically maybe it's part of the cleanup afterwards, something about it basically kind of sticks in your brain, and now this whisper, unsettling movement, sticks in your head, and you give that to the player, and the player basically now at some future point says, basically uses that whisper, gives it up, and basically says the words unsettling movement, and then you decide how basically that changes the world in a way related to that, which could be basically, maybe it's direct and obvious. Maybe that allows them to move in such a way that basically gives them an intimidation against someone else, or maybe it basically maybe it's an illusion spell that gives the idea of basically that there is something in the woods just outside, or basically something in the leaves that basically could scare an opponent or something like that. Or maybe it's something completely entirely different that basically just kind of vaguely relates to the idea of unsettling movement. Basically, maybe it produces a truth or something like that in that moment that unsettles everything and changes the direction of a conversation. So basically, they're really neat little things, and basically they give you examples for all of them, because again, it's kind of this Monster Hunter world. Is basically Monster Hunter is kind of the best way to describe it, where everything has a piece and a part of it that you can use, you can harvest, you can give to your players, because you're not giving them. It's much more interesting than just this monster carries 50 gold, 3 gems, and a +1 sword. It's a flexible tongue. What does that do? It's up to your players to decide what that does. Maybe they use it in the they're like, okay, can I use that as some kind of part of a healing compound or something like that? Sure, okay, we'll work with that. Basically, beast bones, I grind it up into a powder, and basically then I use that powder to basically as a poultice. Because these monsters are that. Basically, maybe I grind it up and use it basically in a potion, which grants me something basically like movement like them, basically being able to move like them, or basically sound like them. Or maybe it's basically parts you use to repair the ship later, like the hide. I use it to repair sails, or not necessarily sails, because you don't really use sails in this, but basically like fabric, or patch holes, or repair clothing, or things like that, or design other things. And so it's a much more interesting, robust kind of system. And then they have things like aspects and quirks, which are, I'll quickly kind of throw those in there so you can see them. Actually, let's break that up so it shows up a little bit better. filling out some more aspects and things like that. And so, and again, basically, all of this was coming back to the idea of basically the idea that I'm setting these pieces up because basically, like, I picked the pinwolves as the fight because I want them, basically, I want something swift and uncanny. Basically, I want my crew to have a fight. I want them to have a fight against something which is fast moving because I feel like that's going to provide an interesting challenge for them. And uncanny. I want them to be kind of pushed a little bit. I want them to be a little bit off balance because of this. I want them to feel like, oh, what's going on? This is weird. This is strange. And basically, I'm using that as a motivating factor, and I'm putting that. Basically, I've set that up as a piece, and then, but I don't have that just geared up as soon as you open this door, the pinwolves attack. I'm going to add it in as where I feel like it best fits. Basically, during the adventure, maybe it's a result of a twist that basically something goes wrong. Then basically somebody slips up, screws up. They break something that they shouldn't have, and the noise echoes through, and then you hear these the cry, basically these hissing sounds through basically in the forest around you as you've alerted the pinwolves. And basically then they come in. Maybe it's as you're going from leaving the ship going to the manor. Maybe while they're exploring the manor, maybe it attacks the town. If you feel like the crew is just sitting around in town and not going out things, if you throw some things in there to push them out. And so it's the way Wildsea wants you to build it out is to take a bunch of puzzle pieces and put them in front of you, and then decide the image you're building, basically as you start putting it together. Basically just start clicking together things and being like, oh, okay, now this is the image that we're going to end up with. This is the end result. And so with Lorelink, a lot of that is going to be putting those pieces in, and then you're going to start, you're going to do a lot of notes and things like that, like discovering the fate of the crew. If your players are making decisions, maybe you're adding the pinwolves in here. Maybe you're adding that survivor in. You're associating those. In. Maybe you're adding notes over what they're finding. That you're adding notes about twists. That crew discovers. We have to prove the map. Hanging Manor. Pages of a basically book in the nest of something like that. So basically now you're like, okay, you're going to be detailing all of these things and building them out and associating them and linking them together, so that you end up with you're going to want to keep track of them as you're going, so that at the end of it, your session is probably going to be your most important piece of information at the end of it, because this is going to give you the summary of everything that the players touched, everything they went to, so that when you come back to the next session, because again, this is going to be, you're probably going to do this think of it as this is going to be maybe it's just one session. They sit down, they go through a long session. Maybe it's a series of smaller sessions to get through all of this. Again, you're going to know your group, but if you are taking breaks between this, the session is going to be your way of coming back and be like, okay, what did we do? How did I've got all these puzzle pieces. How are they connected? What have they completed? Where are they on those tracks? Like, okay, they did find the scissors. I'm going to track that, but I'm going to move heading to the manor, to the next session. I'm going to create a new session for that, and I'm also going to move the repairing the skeleton key project that one of the players was working on and move that on. And I'm going to want to move those to the next session. As I'm going to start to set up that next session as my template for what's going to happen in that next session, what projects are available, what tracks are available, and then I'm going to review all my notes to see exactly what's going on. Now, one of the features, basically one of the things we've talked about with LoreLink, a lot of them, and basically we're in the process right now, I could say. Basically, one of the things that we're going to start adding into LoreLink is basically the interesting part of a system like this is a lot of it is going to be based off, you're going to be wanting to share stuff with your players. And so that's one of the features we're heavily looking at and working on is, okay, basically using LoreLink not only as just your GM resource and things like that, but as a way of getting that information to your players in a way that is timely and quick, that doesn't spoil surprises, as well as, again, basically let your players look up information without taking away from their time at the table or your time at the table to answer their questions. Again, because one of the main purposes behind LoreLink is that the point of it is you're coming together, you're wanting to eat snacks, chat, socialize, and basically play the game. And what you're not there for is spending a lot of time looking at a person flipping through notebooks or clicking through pages or looking up rules or things like that. Those aren't what you're there for. That's not the core concept of it. LoreLink is there to reduce those things so you can have more fun doing the other things. And so one of the things you often have at the table is your players want to know what's going on, what happened last time, what information their characters know. And so adding player sharing in is going to be one of those features which is going to help reduce that information as well. So if you're interested in basically, as we're approaching 620, if you're interested in things like that, basically we highly recommend that you keep paying attention to these streams and basically our streams, our newsletters, our social media. All of those things are going to give you going to let you know when those features are coming, screenshots from those things like that. The newsletter is where you're going to have kind of glimpses and things like that of development, things like that, discussion of other things going on. Social media is where you're going to be able to interact with us and the team and be like, hey, I'm interested in X or Y, or I really wish you'd add that. Where are those features at? Things like that. That's what our social media is for. And these streams are for us showing us, as long as I can get work to write it. Writing is hard. It's fun. It's fine. I don't think I've missed a newsletter. I don't think I've missed a deadline on a newsletter yet. Basically, the only thing I think I'm slow on with the newsletter is, I've been down to the wire on it, but I don't think I've completely forgotten it yet. But the one thing I am slow on with the newsletter is that the website actually has a newsletter archive. Something I don't talk about as much on here is that the website actually has an archive that's about a month behind. So if you're absolutely allergic to any form of giving information or interacting with social media, you can read on the newsletter. You can read the newsletters a month behind on our website. It's basically we have a newsletter archive, as long as I remember to update it. That's the one thing I slack on a little bit, is making sure that those newsletters get basically when I write the next newsletter that I up to date the next one. To be early is to be on time. Basically, that's written by people who don't know and understand the definitions of words. To be on time is to be on time. To be early is to be rude, in fact. Because if you're too early, they aren't expecting you. You set a time for a reason. Gosh. Yes, basically, as Streamlabs has reminded, basically, the system, basically, if you are interested, that is the itch.io website where you can find out more information about Wildsea, and purchase things basically directly, with a system that goes directly to the designer, as it were. Basically, you can pay what you want, you can leave more, you can pay more. The quick start rules are also there. It also is basically it is a digital storefront, so some of the things which are out of print physically or on pre-order physically, you can get ahead of time there at the digital storefront. You know, basically it has a deeper and wider selection than Drive-Thru RPG, which just has the one. Basically has, I think, just the main manual is the only thing that's currently available on Drive-Thru RPG. But in any case, no matter where you get it from, I basically, if this sounded interesting, I suggest picking up a copy of it. Basically, it's a really, if nothing else, it's a really interesting read. In terms of, basically, it's got some great tips on, because of the way it describes running a world, and basically his ideas for how that all works. It's really, basically, it's an interesting read and can kind of possibly change the way that you run some of your other adventures and things like that. Basically giving a little bit more focus to listening to your players and writing adventures so that your players guide them. The system helps you do that, but basically there's some really interesting narrative choices and things like that that you can make to basically that he kind of walks through in the book. Other things I'm going to talk about. Oh, the rest of the month's streaming schedule. So next week, I believe, is video games. So basically, you'll come back to this channel. We'll be playing something video game TTRPG related. Basically, usually that's basically just as take a week off from planning and other brain things. Basically, and then after that, we will be back with another 2-part series. This time focusing on basically, ironically enough, a video game. Which has now become a role-playing game. It has basically, Fallout has a fascinating history. Basically, it started off actually as a GURPS project. Then they lost the rights to GURPS. So basically, they created their own system, and now it's become the special system. And so you'll see that basically. So we'll be talking about looking at. Basically, we'll be building out an adventure in the Modiphius's Fallout system. Now, this is the Modiphius Fallout RPG, not the Modiphius Tactical RPG, which are 2 separate projects, both, I believe, from Modiphius. So if you're looking at basically like, oh, what's the Fallout system? Do be aware that there are 2 different systems. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to it, and that is leading up to the end of the month, May 31st. We are currently looking to, basically, that is not currently etched in stone. So we're working on some scheduling things. Yeah, so not Wasteland Warfare, I believe, is the tactical RPG. Unless I'm badly mistaken. But May 31st is the date that we currently have set for a long play session. We've previously done things like Hardwired Island or Doctor Who. Which basically that is where I spend a couple of planning sessions to plan out an adventure, and then I run that adventure in LoreLink on stream with the LoreLink crew, and we have a lot of fun doing it. It's a great way to see be exposed to more different interesting RPGs. Basically, maybe you haven't heard, basically, and B, it's basically you can see how LoreLink gets used to run a variety of different systems, and how I react to things going on, and basically how I use LoreLink to sort through things. So that is the month of May. That's the next 3 sessions planned out. So look forward to that, and then basically if you want to get notifications when we go live with those, go ahead and follow on this channel if you want notifications. If you like what we're doing and you want to support us, basically we will we're more than happy, and basically we'd be incredibly grateful. Basically if you hit the subscribe button and let us know you think we're doing a good job. Smash that subscribe button, ring that bell. Wait, that's on YouTube, which is the other place this is streaming, is on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can subscribe to our channel for the notifications. And click like on those videos to let us know what you like, basically which videos you like, which ones you're interested in, which ones you want to basically leave comments on, basically what you'd want to see more of, or questions about LoreLink. So I think that of course, basically last but not least, basically our next big thing that we're doing as LoreLink will be being live and in person at Origins. Columbus, Ohio, Origins Game Fair. We are booth 713. I think I'm fairly certain that's the booth number at Origins. So basically, all those things I talked about with keeping track of us, basically Twitch, YouTube, and basically social media, newsletters, the website, are ways for you to find out more about what we're doing at Origins and things like that. Here's one hint: we'll be doing stuff with these two giant bags of stuff. Ugh. Boost 713 at Origins. So, all that to say, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for thank you all for listening. Our mods are desperately scrambling, trying to figure out where commands went. So, oh no. You have the most well-informed, basically most well-linked informed channel here on Twitch that isn't actually named Warlink. So, all that to say, basically I'm hearing thunder outside, so I've pushed the luck far enough on this stream, so I'm going to go ahead and call it a night, and I will catch you all later. Thanks for watching.